The wagon wheel sank deeper into the mud with a sickening squelch, and Catherine Miller knew she was in serious trouble as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Wyoming Trail in the summer of 1875. She had been traveling alone for 3 days now, carrying everything she owned in the back of this borrowed wagon, heading toward the mining town of South Pass City, where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. The letter had arrived 6 months ago, yellowed and water-stained, offering Catherine a new life far from the suffocating confines of Philadelphia society and the scandal that had driven her west. Her former fiancé had made sure everyone knew she had refused his proposal, painting her as a difficult woman with unrealistic expectations. The whispers followed her everywhere until she could bear it no longer. The spring rains had turned this particular stretch of the Oregon Trail into a treacherous mixture of mud and standing water. Catherine had tried to guide the horses around the worst of it, but the wagon was heavy, and she lacked the experience to judge the terrain properly. Now the back left wheel was buried nearly to the axle, and no amount of urging could convince the horses to pull hard enough to free it. She climbed down from the seat, her traveling dress immediately soaking up moisture from the wet ground. The fabric clung to her legs as she waded through the muck to assess the situation. It looked even worse from this angle. The wheel had found some kind of depression or hole, and the weight of her possessions had driven it down deep. Catherine was a practical woman, tall and strong from years of helping her father in his medical practice before his death. But she knew her limitations. She could not lift a fully loaded wagon. She had no tools suitable for digging out the wheel, and even if she did, the mud would simply flow back into any hole she created. The horses stamped nervously, sensing her distress. She looked up and down the trail, hoping to see another traveler, but the landscape remained stubbornly empty. Rolling hills covered in sage and grass stretched in every direction, beautiful and utterly indifferent to her predicament. A few scattered pine trees marked a ridgeline to the north, but otherwise, she might as well have been alone in the world. Catherine refused to panic. She had made it this far by keeping her head and thinking through problems logically. She walked back to the wagon bed and began methodically removing items, carrying them to higher ground. Perhaps if she lightened the load enough, the horses could manage it. Her trunk of clothes came first, surprisingly heavy even though she had packed sparingly. Then came the crate of medical books her father had left her, wrapped carefully in oilcloth. Kitchen supplies, a small writing desk, quilts her mother had made, a box of seeds for planting. The pile grew on the dry ground 20 feet away while the sun continued its arc across the sky. Catherine worked steadily, ignoring the sweat that plastered her dark hair to her neck and the ache building in her shoulders. When she had removed roughly half the contents, she returned to the horses and tried again. They pulled. The wagon rocked slightly but did not move forward. The wheel remained stubbornly trapped. Catherine stood there in the mud, breathing hard, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of despair. Then she squared her shoulders and went back to unloading. She would empty the entire wagon if necessary, though that would leave her vulnerable to theft or weather if she had to leave her possessions unguarded. But what choice did she have? She was carrying another box when she heard it, the jingle of tack and the steady plod of hooves on the muddy trail. Catherine spun around, her heart suddenly pounding for an entirely different reason. The trail could be dangerous for a woman alone. She had a small pistol in the wagon, but she had never actually fired it at anything other than tin cans. The rider appeared from the south, coming around a gentle bend in the trail. Even at a distance, Catherine could see he was enormous. He sat astride a massive roan horse that would have looked large with anyone else riding it, but this man made it seem almost ordinary. As he drew closer, Catherine found herself taking an involuntary step backward. He was easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun when he finally stopped his horse a respectful distance away. His hair was dark brown, touching his collar and badly in need of cutting, with a full beard that somehow looked intentional rather than neglected. He wore buckskin pants and a shirt that might have once been red, but had faded to something like rust, with fringe along the arms that swayed as he moved. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through the shirt, and his hands on the reins looked like they could break rocks. But it was his eyes that caught Catherine's attention. They were a startling blue, bright against his sun-darkened skin, and they assessed the situation with obvious intelligence. This was not just a man of physical strength. There was thought behind that gaze. "Looks like you have got trouble," he said, and his voice was deep, with a rough quality that suggested he did not use it often. It was not unkind, though. Just direct. "The wheel is stuck," Catherine said, then felt immediately foolish. Of course the wheel was stuck. That much was obvious. "I have been trying to lighten the load, but the horses cannot pull it free even with half the weight gone." The man dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward the wagon. Catherine noticed he moved with surprising grace for someone so large, his steps confident despite the treacherous footing. He studied the trapped wheel for a long moment, then walked around the entire wagon, examining it from different angles. She watched him, unsure what to say. He had not introduced himself, had not asked her name. He simply looked at the problem as if it were a puzzle to be solved. "The mud is holding it like a suction," he finally said. "Pulling forward will not work because the angle is wrong. The wheel needs to lift and roll at the same time." He turned to look at her directly. "I can get it out." "How?" Catherine asked. "The horses cannot manage it, and I certainly cannot lift it." "I can," he said simply, as if stating a basic fact like the color of the sky. Catherine almost laughed, thinking he was joking, but his expression remained perfectly serious. "Sir, that wagon weighs, I do not even know how much, but certainly several hundred pounds is even partially unloaded." "Closer to 800 with what you have still got in there," he said. He had already turned back to the wagon and was removing his hat, tossing it onto his saddle. "I will need you to lead the horses. When I give the word, get them pulling steady, not hard. Just steady forward motion. Can you do that?" "Yes, but—" Catherine started to protest that this was impossible, that he would hurt himself. But he was already positioning himself at the back of the wagon. He planted his feet wide in the mud, reached under the wagon bed with both hands, and tested his grip. The muscles in his arms bunched visibly, thick cords standing out beneath his skin. "Get to the horses," he said. "When I say now, get them moving." Catherine hurried to the front of the wagon, taking hold of the lead horse's bridle. Her heart was pounding. This man was going to injure himself attempting something impossible, and she would be responsible for letting him try. But something about his calm confidence made her hesitate to argue further. He clearly believed he could do this. She watched over her shoulder as he adjusted his stance, bending his knees deeply and settling his shoulders directly under the back edge of the wagon bed. His hands gripped the underside. For a moment, everything was still. Then he began to lift. Catherine saw his entire body engage with the effort. His legs drove upward, massive thighs straining against the buckskin. His back remained straight, taking the load properly through his spine rather than bending and risking injury. His shoulders rose, and impossibly, incredibly, the back of the wagon rose with them. The trapped wheel lifted 6 inches out of the mud with a wet, sucking sound. "Now," he grunted, his voice strained but controlled. Catherine snapped into motion, clucking to the horses and tugging gently on the bridle. They leaned into their harness, and this time, with the wheel elevated and the man still lifting, the wagon rolled forward. One rotation of the wheel, then 2, and suddenly it was free, rolling onto firmer ground. "Keep going," the man called, and Catherine led the horses another 20 feet until the wagon was entirely clear of the mud hole. When she turned around, he was standing in the mud, breathing hard but not gasping. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and mud covered him from knees to waist, but he was upright and apparently unhurt. He rolled his shoulders once, then walked over to a relatively dry patch of ground and bent to wash his hands in a small puddle of clearer water. Catherine found herself momentarily speechless. She had just watched a man lift the back of a wagon through sheer physical strength. It seemed like something from a legend, not real life. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along. That was remarkable." He shrugged as if it were nothing. "You learn what you can do when you need to do it. I have moved heavier things when I had to." "What is your name?" Catherine asked. "I'm Catherine Miller. I'm traveling to South Pass City." "Nathaniel Grant," he said. He looked up at the sun, gauging the time. "You've got maybe 3 more hours of good light. South Pass is a hard day's ride from here if you know the trail. Longer if you do not." "I have a map," Catherine said, though she had been finding the actual landscape frustratingly different from the neat lines drawn on paper. Nathaniel looked at her wagon, then at the pile of possessions she had unloaded. "You will need to reload all that. I can help." "I cannot ask you to do more," Catherine protested. "You have already done so much." "Not asking," he said. Just doing. He had already picked up her trunk and was carrying it back to the wagon as easily as if it weighed nothing at all. They worked together in companionable silence, loading everything back into the wagon bed. Catherine found herself stealing glances at him as they worked. Nathaniel moved with purpose and efficiency, fitting items into the wagon more securely than she had managed initially. He was careful with her things, she noticed, handling even the box of seeds gently despite his obvious strength. "Have you been in Wyoming long?" she asked as they secured the last of the load. "About 10 years, he said. Came out in '65 after the war ended, trapped for a while, then found I preferred the high country. I've got a cabin up in the Wind River Range, a day's ride north of here. I come down to the trail sometimes when I need supplies from the trading posts." "You live alone in the mountains?" The idea seemed both romantic and impossibly lonely. "Mostly. It suits me." He checked the wheels of her wagon, making sure everything was secure. "The trail gets rougher ahead. There's another bad stretch about 5 miles on where a creek is overflowed. You might want to camp before you reach it and cross in the morning when you can see properly." "Is there a good spot?" Catherine asked. She'd been choosing her campsites nervously, unsure what made one location safer than another. Nathaniel paused, and she saw something shift in his expression. "I will show you," he said finally. "I was heading south, but I can ride with you to a good place. Make sure you get settled properly." "You do not have to change your plans for me," Catherine said, though the offer sent relief flooding through her. The idea of camping alone again had been weighing on her mind. "My plans are flexible," he said, "and it is not safe for a woman alone out here. Not because of the land, but because of some of the men who travel it." The blunt honesty of that statement made Catherine shiver despite the warm air. She had been trying not to think too hard about that particular danger. "Then I would be grateful for your company, Mr. Grant." "Just Nathaniel," he said, swinging back up onto his horse. "Mr. Grant was my father, and he has been dead 15 years now." They traveled together as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Nathaniel rode alongside the wagon, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her about rough patches in the trail. He spoke sparingly, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He was not making conversation for the sake of it, Catherine realized. He said what needed to be said, and nothing more. She found it refreshing after years of Philadelphia social circles, where people talked endlessly and said almost nothing of substance. There was something peaceful about riding along with only the creak of the wagon and the steady clopping of hooves breaking the silence. The landscape rolled past, vast and beautiful, in the golden late afternoon light. "Why South Pass City?" Nathaniel asked after they had covered perhaps 2 miles. "My aunt runs a boarding house there," Catherine explained. "She wrote to me after my father died. I had no other family in Philadelphia, and I needed a fresh start." "Running from something or running to something?" he asked, then added, "Not trying to pry, just making conversation." Catherine considered the question. "Both, I suppose. Running from expectations and gossip, running toward the possibility of a life where I can make my own choices." Nathaniel nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "The territory is good for that. People mostly care about what you can do, not who your family was or what happened back east." "What were you running from?" Catherine asked, then immediately worried she had overstepped. "I am sorry. That was too personal." "The war," he said simply, "and what it made me into. I needed distance from all of that. The mountains do not care what you did before. They only care what you can do now." They rode in silence for a while after that. Catherine thought about what he had said, about becoming something the war had made him. She wondered what he had seen, what he had done. He could not be much older than 30, which meant he would have been young when he fought. Her father had treated soldiers returning from the war, had seen the haunted looks in their eyes and the wounds that went deeper than flesh. She recognized something similar in Nathaniel's careful solitude. The sun was hanging low above the mountains when Nathaniel guided them off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwood trees. A small creek ran through the area, clear and shallow, with good grass for the horses. The trees would provide shelter if the wind picked up, and the location was slightly elevated, protecting against any unexpected flooding. "This is a good spot," he said, dismounting. "I have camped here before. The ground drains well, and you can see the trail from here so you will know if anyone is approaching." Catherine climbed down from the wagon seat, feeling every hour of driving in her sore muscles. Nathaniel was already unhitching her horses, moving efficiently through the process. She watched for a moment, then went to start gathering wood for a fire. She might not know much about trail travel, but she had learned how to build a proper fire during her journey. By the time full darkness fell, Catherine had a cheerful fire burning and coffee heating in her battered pot. Nathaniel had tended to all 3 horses, making sure they were hobbled where they could graze and reach water. He had also scouted the immediate area, though Catherine had not noticed him doing it until he reappeared from the darkness. "I have got some dried venison if you are hungry," he offered, pulling a wrapped package from his saddlebag. "And some cornbread, though it is a few days old and pretty tough." "I have beans and bacon," Catherine said, "and potatoes that are still mostly good. We could pool our resources and have an actual meal." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Nathaniel's bearded mouth. "That sounds fine." They prepared food together with the ease of 2 people who had both learned to be self-sufficient. Catherine sliced potatoes and bacon into her pan, while Nathaniel added beans to a pot and set it at the edge of the fire to warm. His dried venison, cut into strips, went into the pan with the potatoes. The smells of cooking food filled the air, and Catherine realized she was genuinely hungry for the first time in days. When everything was ready, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, eating from tin plates. The food was simple but satisfying. Catherine had not realized how lonely her previous campsites had been until now, when she had someone to share a meal with. Even though Nathaniel was not particularly talkative, his presence was comforting. "This is good," he said, gesturing to the food with his fork. "You know how to cook on a trail. That's not as common as you might think among people coming from back east." "My father was a doctor," Catherine explained. "He often traveled to treat patients who could not come to him. Sometimes I went along to assist. I learned to make do with what was available." "A doctor's daughter," Nathaniel said thoughtfully. "That explains some things." "What things?" Catherine asked, curious. "The way you move," he said. "Confident, like you have dealt with difficult situations before and come through them. And you did not panic about the wagon. You started solving the problem." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I may have been panicking a little on the inside. But you did not let it control you," Nathaniel pointed out. "That matters more." They finished eating, and Catherine cleaned the dishes with sand and water from the creek, while Nathaniel added more wood to the fire. The night had grown cool, as it often did in the mountains even during summer, and the warmth was welcome. When Catherine returned from the creek, she found Nathaniel had positioned a large log near the fire as a bench of sorts, and he gestured to it. "You should sit close to the fire," he said. "It will get colder before morning." Catherine settled onto the log, grateful for the consideration. Nathaniel sat down as well, leaving a respectful distance between them, but close enough that they could share the fire's warmth. Above them, stars were emerging in impossible numbers, more than Catherine had ever seen in her life. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. "It is beautiful out here," she said softly. "I've never seen stars like this." "Too many lights back east," Nathaniel said. "Out here, you can see what the sky really looks like. It helps remind you how small your problems are when you look at something that big." "Is that why you stay in the mountains?" Catherine asked. "For the perspective?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Partly," he said finally. "Mostly because I am better with the quiet than I am with people. I spent too long around noise and chaos, screaming and guns and men dying. When I came out here and found the high country, it was the first time I could hear myself think in years. The first time the ringing in my ears stopped long enough for me to feel like myself again." Catherine ached at the pain she heard beneath his words. "The war took a lot from everyone who fought in it. And from the people who did not fight, but still had to live through it," Nathaniel added, glancing at her. "I imagine you saw your share of suffering if your father was treating people during those years." "He worked in the hospitals in Philadelphia," Catherine confirmed. "I helped when they would let me. There were so many wounded men, and never enough hands to care for them all. I learned more about human suffering in those years than I ever wanted to know." "But you still want to help people," Nathaniel observed. "You could have stayed in Philadelphia and lived an easier life." "Could I?" Catherine asked with a bitter laugh. Society has very specific ideas about what an unmarried woman of 24 should be doing with her life. When I refused to marry a man I did not love, I became a subject of gossip and criticism. My father's work was acceptable when he was alive to shield me, but after his death, people made it clear I was behaving inappropriately by maintaining an interest in medicine. Coming west seemed like my only option for living the kind of life I wanted. Nathaniel looked at her with those intense blue eyes, and Catherine had the unsettling feeling he was seeing far more than she had intended to reveal. 24 is not old, he said, and refusing to marry someone you do not love seems like the smartest thing a person could do. You would think so, Catherine said, but society prefers obedient women to smart ones. Then society is foolish, Nathaniel said firmly. Obedience without thought is how people end up in situations they cannot escape. Better to be smart and free than obedient and trapped. Catherine found herself smiling. I wish more people shared your perspective. Most people out here do, Nathaniel said. Wyoming territory is not kind to people who cannot think for themselves. It teaches you fast to value capability over conformity. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to coals. Catherine felt the day's exhaustion settling into her bones, but she was reluctant to retreat to her bedroll just yet. There was something peaceful about sitting here with Nathaniel, sharing the warmth and the quiet. She had been alone for so long, first in her grief after her father's death, and then on this journey, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have companionship. You should sleep, Nathaniel said eventually. I will keep watch for a while, make sure nothing disturbs the camp. You need rest too, Catherine protested. I am used to light sleeping, he said, and I will feel better knowing you are safe. I will wake you in a few hours if you want to take a turn at watch. Catherine wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her too insistently. She nodded and went to the wagon, pulling out her bedroll and spreading it near enough to the fire for warmth, but not so close as to be dangerous. As she settled in, wrapping her blankets around her shoulders, she looked across the flames and found Nathaniel watching over the camp, his rifle resting across his knees. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Catherine fell asleep feeling truly safe. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of birds greeting the dawn. Nathaniel was crouched by the fire, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He glanced up when she stirred and nodded a morning greeting. You let me sleep all night, Catherine said, sitting up and pushing hair out of her face. You were supposed to wake me. You needed the rest more than I did, he said simply, offering her one of the cups. I slept some. Enough. Catherine accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. The morning air was crisp and cool, though the rising sun promised another warm day ahead. She watched Nathaniel as he worked, moving around the camp with quiet efficiency. He had already tended to the horses and packed his own gear. Now he was cooking something in the pan, and the smell made her stomach growl. I am using the last of your bacon, he said. Hope that is acceptable. Of course, Catherine said. You provided dinner. The least I can do is supply breakfast. They ate quickly, both aware that the day would be long and they needed to make good time. As Catherine packed her belongings back into the wagon, Nathaniel stamped out the fire and scattered the ashes, leaving the campsite as pristine as they had found it. The creek crossing I mentioned is about 2 hours ahead, he said as they prepared to leave. After that, the trail improves. You should reach the settlement of Miners Rest by evening if you keep a steady pace. You can get supplies there and rest before the final push to South Pass City. Catherine nodded, then hesitated. Will you ride with me that far? I know you were headed south, and I've already taken you off your course. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. I will ride with you to Miners Rest, he said finally. Make sure you get through the crossing safely. Relief flooded through Catherine, though she tried not to show it too obviously. Thank you. I truly appreciate your help. They set out as the sun climbed higher, following the trail through increasingly rugged terrain. The land here was beautiful in a harsh way, all sage-covered hills and rocky outcroppings with mountains rising dramatically in the distance. Catherine had grown up among the brick and cobblestone of Philadelphia, where nature was something that happened in carefully maintained parks. This wild landscape was entirely different, and she found herself falling in love with its raw, untamed beauty. Nathaniel had been right about the creek crossing. When they reached it, Catherine could see immediately why he had been concerned. The creek, swollen with runoff, cut across the trail at an angle, flowing fast and murky. The crossing was perhaps 30 feet wide, and while it did not look terribly deep, the current was strong enough to worry her. "The bottom is rocky but stable," Nathaniel said, studying the water. "Your wagon should make it across if you keep the horses moving steadily. Do not let them stop in the middle, or the current might push the wagon sideways. I will ride ahead and turn back to guide you across." He suited action to words, urging his big roan into the water. The horse managed the crossing with confidence, water splashing up around its legs but never reaching higher than its chest. On the far side, Nathaniel turned and called back to her. "Keep them straight and keep them moving. You can do this." Catherine took a deep breath and snapped the reins. The horses entered the water reluctantly but responded to her urging. The wagon followed, and Catherine felt the current immediately, pushing against the wheels and making the whole rig shift slightly. She kept the reins firm, calling encouragement to the horses, focusing on Nathaniel on the far bank rather than on the water rushing around her. Halfway across, the wagon hit something underwater, a rock or a log, and lurched violently to the side. Catherine felt the whole thing tilt, and for a terrifying moment she thought it would tip over. The horses panicked, trying to rear despite the water, and Catherine had to fight to keep control. Then Nathaniel was there, somehow having gotten his horse back into the water with impossible speed. He grabbed the lead horse's bridle with one hand, his voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. "Steady now, steady. You are fine. Just walk forward." The horses responded to him immediately, calming under his touch and voice. He guided them through the rest of the crossing, his powerful arms keeping them on course despite the current. By the time they reached the far bank, Catherine was shaking, but the wagon was intact and upright. "That was well handled," Nathaniel said, releasing the horse. "You kept your head when it mattered." "I almost lost control," Catherine said, her voice unsteady. "Almost is not the same as did," Nathaniel pointed out. "You got across. That is what counts." They continued on, and gradually Catherine's heart rate returned to normal. Nathaniel had been right about the trail improving after the crossing. The ground became firmer, and the route was clearer. They made good time through the afternoon, and as the sun began its descent, Catherine spotted buildings in the distance. Miner's Rest was hardly impressive by Philadelphia standards, just a collection of rough wooden structures clustered around a central street, but to Catherine it looked wonderful. The promise of a real bed and perhaps a hot meal was almost overwhelming. "The boarding house at the end of the street is run by a woman named Mrs. Kowalski," Nathaniel said as they entered the town. "She is honest and charges fair prices. Tell her I sent you and she will take good care of you." "You are not staying?" Catherine asked, surprised by how disappointed she felt. Nathaniel shook his head. "I have business at the trading post, and then I need to head back north. I've been away from my trap lines longer than I planned." "Of course," Catherine said, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand. Thank you for everything, Nathaniel. I truly could not have made it this far without your help." He looked at her, and something complicated passed across his face. "You would have found a way," he said. "You are stronger than you think." He paused, then added, "Mrs. Kowalski will help you find a guide to take you on to South Pass City if you need one. It is only another day's travel, but you should not go alone." "I will ask her," Catherine promised. They sat there on their horses in the middle of the dusty street, and Catherine realized she did not want to say goodbye. In just over a day, this quiet mountain man had become important to her in a way she did not fully understand. He had helped her, protected her, and treated her like a capable person rather than a fragile woman who needed constant management. She wanted more time with him, wanted to hear more of his carefully chosen words, and see more of that rare, almost smile. "If you are ever in South Pass City, please come find me," she said impulsively. "I would like to thank you properly when I'm not covered in trail dust and exhausted." Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. "I might do that," he said. "South Pass is not so far from my usual territory. I come through sometimes." "Then I hope you will come through soon," Catherine said, and she meant it with an intensity that surprised her. "Be safe, Catherine," Nathaniel said. Then he turned his horse and rode toward the trading post, leaving her sitting in front of the boarding house. Catherine watched him go, memorizing the set of his shoulders and the way he moved with his horse as if they were one creature. Then she sighed, climbed down from the wagon, and and went to knock on the boarding house door. Mrs. Kowalski turned out to be a stout Polish woman with shrewd eyes and a warm smile. When Catherine mentioned Nathaniel's name, the woman's face lit up. Ah, Nathaniel Grant. That man is good people, very good people. Any friend of his is welcome here. Come, come, you look exhausted. I will help you stable your horses and get your things inside. You need food, a bath, and sleep, yes? Yes, all of those things, Catherine agreed gratefully. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Kowalski seemed to run her boarding house like a general commanding an army, directing Catherine efficiently through each task. By the time full dark had fallen, Catherine was clean, fed, and tucked into a small but comfortable room with actual walls and a real bed. She should have fallen asleep immediately, but instead, she found herself lying awake thinking about Nathaniel. She barely knew him. They had spent less than 2 days together. Yet something about him had reached past all her carefully constructed defenses. Perhaps it was the way he had helped her without expecting anything in return. Perhaps it was his quiet competence or his straightforward honesty. Perhaps it was simply that he had treated her as an equal, someone whose opinions and capabilities mattered. Or perhaps it was the memory of watching him lift the back of a wagon with his shoulders, his whole body engaged in an impossible feat of strength, doing it simply because she needed help. Catherine fell asleep thinking about blue eyes and rare smiles, and she dreamed of mountains. The next morning, Mrs. Kowalski informed her that a reliable man named Tom Patterson would be happy to escort her wagon to South Pass City for a reasonable fee. Tom turned out to be a weathered older man with kind eyes who told her stories about the territory throughout the day's journey. He was pleasant company, but Catherine found herself comparing him unfavorably to Nathaniel, which was entirely unfair to poor Tom. They reached South Pass City in the late afternoon, and Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as they rolled into town. This would be her new home, her fresh start, the place where she would build a new life. Her aunt's boarding house was easy to find, a 2-story structure that looked well-maintained and prosperous. Catherine paid Tom and thanked him for his help, then stood looking at the building for a long moment before gathering her courage and walking up to the door. The woman who answered was in her 50s, with the same dark hair and tall frame that Catherine had inherited from that side of the family. Her face broke into a delighted smile when she saw Catherine. "You must be Catherine. Oh, my dear girl, you look so much like your mother. Come in, come in. I'm Aunt Margaret, and I am so glad you made it safely." The welcome was warm and genuine, and Catherine felt some of her anxiety ease. Margaret helped her bring in her things, chattering the whole time about the boarding house, the town, and the opportunities available for a smart young woman in Wyoming territory. By evening, Catherine was installed in a pleasant room on the 2nd floor, and she was beginning to think this might actually work out. Over the next few weeks, Catherine settled into her new life. She helped Aunt Margaret run the boarding house, which was always full of miners, prospectors, and various other characters passing through the territory. The work was hard but satisfying, and Catherine found she enjoyed the constant variety of people and stories. She also began offering her services as a medical assistant. South Pass City had a doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Morrison, who was delighted to have someone with Catherine's training available to help. He began referring patients to her for basic care, and soon Catherine was supplementing her income by treating minor injuries and illnesses. But despite her busy days and the satisfaction of building a new life, Catherine found her thoughts returning again and again to Nathaniel. She watched the trail leading into town, hoping to see a massive man on a roan horse. She listened to the conversations in the boarding house, hoping to hear his name mentioned. She went to the trading post and asked casually if anyone had seen him, trying not to seem too interested. The weeks turned into a month, then 2 months. Summer faded toward autumn, and the nights grew colder. Catherine told herself to forget about him. He had been kind to her during a difficult time, nothing more. He lived alone in the mountains because he preferred solitude. He was not going to come riding into town looking for her. But her heart refused to listen to logic. It was late September when everything changed. Catherine was in the boarding house kitchen, helping prepare dinner for the guests, when she heard a commotion from the front room. Raised voices, someone shouting for a doctor. She dropped the knife she had been using and hurried out to find several men supporting an injured friend. Blood soaked the man's leg, and he was barely conscious. "I am a medical assistant," Catherine said, taking charge immediately. "Bring him into the parlor and lay him on the sofa. Someone get Dr. Morrison. The rest of you give me room to work." The next hour was intense and focused. The man had been injured in a mining accident, a rockfall that had crushed his leg. Catherine cut away his pants, cleaned the wound, and did her best to stabilize him until Dr. Morrison arrived. The doctor took one look at her work and nodded approval. "Good job, Miss Miller. Clean bandaging and you have stopped the bleeding. Let us see if we can save the leg." They worked together while Aunt Margaret kept the curious crowd back and brought them supplies. It was delicate work, but between them they managed to set the broken bone and close the worst of the wounds. By the time they finished, Catherine was exhausted and covered in blood, but the man was resting more comfortably, his chances much improved. "You have a gift for this," Dr. Morrison told her as they washed up. "I am getting too old for the rough work. Would you consider taking on more responsibility? I could use a proper assistant, someone who could handle cases when I'm not available." "I would like that very much," Catherine said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of work she had hoped to do out here. News of her successful treatment spread quickly through the small town. Over the next few weeks, more people sought her out for medical care. Catherine found herself busier than ever, splitting her time between the boarding house and Dr. Morrison's office. It was exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. October arrived with the first real cold snap, and snow dusted the higher peaks surrounding the town. Catherine was returning to the boarding house one evening after treating a child's fever when she saw the horse hitched outside. A massive roan that looked very familiar. Her heart leapt into her throat. She walked faster, trying not to run, and pushed through the front door to find Nathaniel sitting in the parlor, talking quietly with Aunt Margaret. He looked up when she entered, and his face transformed with one of those rare smiles. "Hello, Catherine," he said, standing. "I heard you made quite an impression on the town. Seems you are becoming the talk of South Pass City." Catherine wanted to say something clever, something sophisticated, but what came out was simply, "You came." "I said I might," Nathaniel replied, "and I was in the area. Thought I would stop by and see how you were settling in." Aunt Margaret looked between them with obvious interest, her eyes twinkling. "I will just go check on dinner," she said, making herself scarce with surprising speed for a woman her age. Catherine and Nathaniel stood there in the parlor, and suddenly Catherine felt shy. He looked the same as she remembered, big and solid and real, his hair still touching his collar, and his beard neatly trimmed. His blue eyes were just as intense, just as capable of seeing straight through her carefully maintained composure. "I have thought about you," she admitted. "I hoped you would come, but I did not actually expect it." "I have thought about you too," Nathaniel said quietly. "More than I probably should have. I kept telling myself you were settling into your new life and did not need some mountain man appearing out of nowhere, but I could not seem to stay away." "I am glad you could not stay away," Catherine said. She took a step closer to him. "I have missed you, Nathaniel, which seems absurd since we only knew each other for a day and a half, but it is true." "Does not seem absurd to me," Nathaniel said. "Sometimes you just know when something matters, when someone matters." They stood close now, and Catherine could feel the warmth radiating from him. She remembered sitting by the fire on the trail, feeling safe for the first time in so long. She had not realized how much she wanted to feel that way again. "How long are you staying in town?" she asked. "I brought in a load of furs to trade," Nathaniel said. "Probably be here 2 or 3 days while I conduct my business. I was hoping you might have some time to spend with me. I know you are busy with your work, but maybe we could have dinner. Or I could help you with something if you need an extra pair of hands." "I would like that very much," Catherine said. "Actually, I have tomorrow afternoon free. Dr. Morrison told me I need to take more time for myself, or I will burn out. Perhaps you could show me more of the area. I have been so busy I have not had a chance to explore." "I could do that," Nathaniel agreed. "There is a place up in the hills about an hour's ride from here. The aspens are turning gold right now. It is worth seeing." "Then it is settled," Catherine said, smiling. "Meet me here tomorrow after lunch." "I will be here," Nathaniel promised. He stayed for dinner that evening, and Catherine watched him charm her aunt and the boarding house guests with his quiet competence and occasional dry observations. People responded to him, she noticed. They respected him. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. After dinner, Catherine walked him out to his horse. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Nathaniel checked his horse's tack, then turned to face her. "I'm glad I came," he said. "I was not sure if I should. Thought maybe you had moved on, found your place here, and did not need reminders of the trail." "You are not a reminder of the trail," Catherine said firmly. "You are someone important, someone I want in my life, Nathaniel. I do not know what that looks like yet, but I know I want to find out." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was warm and rough, calloused from hard work, and his touch was surprisingly gentle. "We will figure it out," he said. "I'm not good with words or social graces, but I know what I feel. And I feel something powerful when I'm with you, Catherine, something I have not felt in a very long time." "What is that?" she asked softly. "Like maybe I do not have to be alone anymore," he said. "Like maybe there is room in my life for more than just mountains and silence." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. She reached up and covered his hand with hers where it still rested against her cheek. "There is room in your life for whatever you want there to be room for," she said, "and I hope that includes me." "It does," Nathaniel said firmly. "Definitely does." They stood there in the cold night air, hands touching, eyes locked. Then Nathaniel stepped back reluctantly. "I should go. Let you get your rest. But I will see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Catherine agreed. She watched him ride away into the darkness, and this time, instead of feeling disappointed, she felt hopeful. He had come back. He wanted to spend time with her. Whatever was growing between them, it was not one-sided. The next day seemed to drag on forever. Catherine helped with breakfast, treated 2 patients with minor ailments, and tried to focus on her tasks while her mind kept wandering to the upcoming afternoon. Finally, after lunch, she changed into her riding clothes and waited in the parlor. Nathaniel arrived exactly when he had said he would, leading both his roan and a gentle bay mare from the livery stable. "Figured you might need a horse," he said. "This one is steady and reliable. The stable owner says she is good with inexperienced riders." "I can ride," Catherine said, slightly indignant. "I had lessons as a girl." "Philadelphia lessons or frontier lessons?" Nathaniel asked, his eyes twinkling. "Point taken," Catherine admitted. "I appreciate you thinking of it." They rode out of town together, following a trail that climbed gradually into the hills. Nathaniel had been right about the aspens. The trees lined the hillsides in glowing patches of gold and orange, brilliant against the deep green of the pines and the blue of the sky. It was breathtakingly beautiful. As they rode, they talked. Really talked, in a way they had not quite managed before. Nathaniel told her about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands and the satisfaction of living simply. He talked about the animals he encountered, the way the seasons transformed the landscape, the peace he found in solitude. Catherine told him about her work with Dr. Morrison, about the satisfaction of helping people and using the skills her father had taught her. She talked about the boarding house, about Aunt Margaret's kindness, about slowly building friendships in this new place. She also told him about the loneliness she sometimes felt, the sense that something was missing even as she built this new life. "You need someone to share it with," Nathaniel said perceptively. "All the work in the world does not fill up the spaces inside that are meant for connection." "Is that why you came to find me?" Catherine asked. "Because you have those spaces too?" "I think so," Nathaniel admitted. "I've been alone a long time. Thought I preferred it that way. But after meeting you, after spending that time on the trail together, I started noticing how quiet my cabin was. Not peaceful quiet, just empty quiet. And I realized I did not want that anymore." They had reached a clearing with a view over the valley, and Nathaniel dismounted, helping Catherine down from her horse. They stood at the edge of the overlook, looking out at the vast landscape spread below them. The town was visible in the distance, small and insignificant against the sweep of the land. "It is magnificent," Catherine breathed. "I never imagined anything could be so beautiful." "Wait until winter," Nathaniel said, "when everything is covered in snow and the sun makes it all sparkle like diamonds. That is when this country really shows you what it can do." "Will you show me?" Catherine asked, turning to look at him. "When winter comes, will you bring me up here to see it?" "If you want me to," Nathaniel said, I will show you everything, all the places I love, all the secret spots nobody else knows about, if you want to see them with me." "I do," Catherine said. She stepped closer to him, emboldened by the privacy of the clearing and the intensity in his eyes. "I want to see all of it, and I want to see it with you, Nathaniel." He looked down at her, his expression serious. "You know what you are asking for. I am not an easy man, Catherine. I have been alone so long I'm not sure I remember how to be with someone. I have habits that might drive you crazy, and I'm not good at talking about feelings or doing the things society says you are supposed to do." "Good," Catherine said firmly, "because I am not interested in what society says I am supposed to do. I have spent my whole life trying to meet other people's expectations, and where did it get me? Alone and miserable until I finally broke free. I do not want easy and conventional, Nathaniel. I want real, I want honest, and I want you." Something broke open in his expression, a wall coming down that Catherine had not even fully realized was there. He reached for her, his large hands settling gently on her waist, and pulled her close. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm falling for you. Probably have been since I watched you working so hard to free that wagon, refusing to give up. I tried to fight it, tried to tell myself I should leave you alone, but I cannot. I do not want to." "Then do not," Catherine said, rising onto her toes and sliding her arms around his neck. "Do not fight it, and do not leave me alone. Just be here with me." He kissed her then, and it was everything she had been hoping for and more. His lips were warm despite the cold air, and his beard was softer than she expected. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But when Catherine pressed closer, kissing him back with all the longing she had been carrying for months, he responded with more confidence. His arms tightened around her, holding her securely, and Catherine felt safe and wanted and exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since I watched you march into that creek crossing like you could conquer the world." Catherine laughed, breathless and happy. "I have been wanting you to do that since I watched you lift the back of a wagon with your bare hands like some kind of legendary hero." "Not a hero," Nathaniel said, but he was smiling. "Just a man who found something worth being strong for." They spent the rest of the afternoon in that clearing, talking and kissing and making plans. Nathaniel would stay in town for a few more days, then return to his cabin to prepare for winter. But he promised to come back to South Pass City regularly. He wanted to court her properly, he said, to give them time to build something real and lasting. "I am not good with words," he said, holding both her hands in his much larger ones, "but I can show you how I feel. I can be here for you, help you when you need it, stand beside you when things get hard. I can build you a life where you are free to be everything you want to be. If you will have me." "I will have you," Catherine said firmly, "on whatever terms work for both of us. We do not have to follow anyone else's rules, Nathaniel. We can build this however we want." "Good," he said, "because I want to build it with you." They rode back to town in the gathering dusk, hands occasionally reaching across the space between their horses to touch and connect. When they reached the boarding house, Nathaniel walked Catherine to the door, kissed her one more time in the shadows of the porch, and promised to return in the morning. True to his word, he was there for breakfast, charming Aunt Margaret all over again. He spent the day helping around the boarding house, fixing things that needed repair and splitting wood for the winter. Catherine watched him work between her own tasks, admiring the easy way he moved and the quiet competence he brought to everything he did. That evening, they sat together by the fire in the parlor after the other guests had retired. Nathaniel had pulled Catherine close, his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned against his solid warmth with a sense of contentment she had never experienced before. "Tell me about your cabin," she said. "I want to be able to picture where you are when you are not here." Nathaniel described it in detail, the single room he had built from logs he cut and hauled himself, the stone fireplace that kept it warm even in the deepest cold, the view from the front porch over a small valley where deer came to graze. He talked about the way sunlight came through the windows in the morning and the sound of the wind in the pines at night. "It sounds wonderful," Catherine said wistfully. "I would love to see it someday." "You will," Nathaniel promised. "When the time is right, I will take you there, show you how I live when I am alone in the mountains. "Will you teach me?" Catherine asked. "How to live out there, how to be comfortable in the wilderness. I want to understand that part of your life." Nathaniel looked down at her with such warmth in his eyes that it made her heart ache. "I will teach you everything," he said, "if you really want to learn. But you need to know, Catherine, it is a hard life. Beautiful and free, but hard. Cold winters and isolation and work that never ends." "I am not afraid of hard work," Catherine said, "and I am not afraid of the isolation if I am with you. You are the opposite of lonely." He kissed the top of her head. "You are too good to be real sometimes." "I am very real," Catherine assured him, "and I am right here, and I am not going anywhere." The next few days passed in a blur of happiness. Nathaniel completed his business in town, but he delayed his departure, finding excuses to stay another day, and then another. He and Catherine spent every moment they could together, learning each other's rhythms and habits, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of something that felt solid and true. But eventually, the weather began to turn colder, and Nathaniel could delay no longer. He needed to return to his cabin to prepare properly for the winter and check his trap lines. "I will be back before the heavy snows," he promised as they stood beside his packed horse on the morning of his departure. "A month, maybe 5 weeks, and in the spring we will talk about what comes next, about how to build a life that works for both of us." "I will be here," Catherine said, holding his hands tightly, "waiting for you, working and learning and thinking about what I want our future to look like." Nathaniel pulled her close, holding her tightly against his chest. Catherine could hear his heart beating strong and steady beneath her ear. "I love you," he said quietly. "I do not say those words lightly, Catherine, but I love you, and I'm going to build us a future worth having." "I love you too," Catherine whispered against his shirt. "Come back to me safely." "Always," he promised. She watched him ride out of town until he disappeared around the bend in the trail. Only then did she let the tears fall, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. She'd come west running from a life that did not fit her, hoping to find something better. She had found so much more than she ever expected. The next month was difficult. Catherine threw herself into her work, assisting Dr. Morrison with an increasingly heavy patient load as the cold weather brought more injuries and illnesses. She helped Aunt Margaret prepare the boarding house for winter, making sure they had adequate supplies and fuel. She kept busy from dawn until well past dark, but in the quiet moments she missed Nathaniel with an ache that surprised her with its intensity. Letters were impractical given where he lived, so she had no way to know how he was doing. She simply had to trust that he would return as promised. Some days that faith came easily. Other days she struggled with doubt, wondering if she had imagined the connection between them, or if he had changed his mind during the separation. But then, on a gray November morning exactly 5 weeks after he had left, Catherine looked up from treating a patient's cough to see a familiar massive figure filling the doorway of Dr. Morrison's office. "Nathaniel!" She abandoned all professional dignity and rushed across the room to throw herself into his arms. He caught her easily, lifting her feet clear off the ground as he held her close. "Told you I would come back," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I knew you would," Catherine said, even though there had been moments when she had doubted. "I missed you so much." "Missed you too," Nathaniel said. He set her down carefully and looked around the office with interest. "This where you work?" "Most days," Catherine confirmed, suddenly aware that Dr. Morrison and the patient were watching with great interest. She blushed. "Let me just finish up here, and then we can talk properly." She completed the patient's treatment with professional efficiency, despite her racing heart. As soon as she was done, she grabbed her coat and practically dragged Nathaniel outside. "I was not expecting you today," she said, taking his hand as they walked. "Your letter said you would not be back until next week at earliest." "Got things done faster than I expected," Nathaniel explained, "and I could not wait any longer to see you, so I pushed hard and made good time." They walked through town together, catching up on the past weeks. Nathaniel told her about the work he had done on his cabin, repairs and improvements to make it more comfortable. He'd thought about her the whole time, he said, imagining her there with him, wondering what she would think of his home. Catherine told him about her work, about the patients she had treated, and the small triumphs of healing. She told him about the way the town was preparing for winter, and about Aunt Margaret's delight in the obvious romance developing between her niece and the mountain man. She likes you, Catherine said. Everyone does. People keep asking me when you are coming back, if we are courting, when we might get married. Are those questions you want answered? Nathaniel asked carefully. Catherine stopped walking and turned to face him fully. They had reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. Yes, she said honestly. I want to know what you are thinking, what you want, where this is going. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment with those intense blue eyes. I want to marry you, he said bluntly. I know it has only been a few months since we met, and most people would say that is too fast. But I'm 32 years old, Catherine. I've lived alone and been content with that. Until I met you. Now I do not want to be alone anymore. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a life together, whatever that looks like. So yes, I want to marry you, if you will have me. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. That was quite possibly the least romantic proposal in history, she said, but she was smiling through happy tears. And yes, I will marry you, Nathaniel Grant. He swept her into his arms, lifting her and spinning her around with a whoop of joy that was completely out of character and entirely wonderful. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring who might see them. When? He asked when they finally broke apart. How soon can we do this? There is a minister in town, Catherine said, laughing at his eagerness. We need to post the banns for a few weeks, and I should probably have some kind of dress made, and Aunt Margaret will want to plan something. How long does all that take? Nathaniel asked impatiently. A month? Maybe 6 weeks if we push? Catherine guessed. Nathaniel frowned as if that was far too long. Then his expression cleared. What if we did it sooner? Just a simple ceremony, you and me and whoever wants to witness it. We could do the big celebration later when the weather is better and more people can travel in. But we could be married now, start our life together, now instead of waiting. Catherine considered this. It was not what she had imagined when she thought about getting married. But then, nothing about her relationship with Nathaniel followed conventional expectations. What would that mean for where we live? She asked. Your cabin is too remote for me to continue my work with Dr. Morrison, but I do not want to give that up. And you need access to your trap lines and your territory. I have been thinking about that, Nathaniel said. What if we split our time? I spend winters in the mountains where the trapping is good, but I come into town regularly to sell furs and see you. Then, when spring comes, you come up to the cabin and spend the warm months with me in the high country. You could still practice medicine, just for a different group of people. Trappers and hunters and homesteaders in the remote areas. They need medical care too. That could work, Catherine said slowly, thinking it through. Dr. Morrison has been talking about training someone else to help with the practice anyway. Maybe I could take on more of the remote cases, the ones that require travel to reach patients. So we make it work, Nathaniel said firmly. We build something new that fits who we both are. We do not have to choose between your work and my life. We figure out how to have both. Then let us do it, Catherine said decisively. Let us get married as soon as possible and start building this life together. They were married 10 days later in a simple ceremony at the church with Aunt Margaret and Dr. Morrison as witnesses. Catherine wore a practical dress of deep blue wool that she could wear again rather than a fancy gown she would never use. Nathaniel had trimmed his beard and wore clean buckskin that somehow looked right for the occasion. The minister kept the ceremony brief at their request, and within 15 minutes, Catherine Miller became Catherine Grant. The small celebration afterward at the boarding house was warm and genuine. The residents toasted the couple, and Aunt Margaret cried happy tears while insisting she had known from the moment she saw them together that this would happen. Dr. Morrison pulled Catherine aside to promise he would hold her position for when she returned from the mountains, that he valued her work too much to let her go completely. That night, in the small room that had been Catherine's, she and Nathaniel finally had privacy. He was surprisingly gentle, careful with her despite his obvious desire. They learned each other slowly, taking time to explore and discover what brought pleasure. Catherine had worried it might be awkward or uncomfortable, but with Nathaniel, everything felt natural and right. He made her feel cherished and desired and entirely safe. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms with her head on his chest, Catherine felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what had been missing, this connection and partnership and love. Happy? Nathaniel asked, his deep voice rumbling under her ear. Incredibly, Catherine said. She tilted her head to kiss his jaw. Are you? More than I thought possible, he admitted. I never expected this, never expected you. I thought I was done with hoping for things. Well, now you can start hoping again, Catherine said, because we have a whole life ahead of us to build together. They spent 2 weeks in South Pass City, allowing Catherine to finish up her immediate responsibilities and make arrangements for her absence. She worked with Dr. Morrison to train a young man who had expressed interest in medicine, showing him the basics so he could handle simple cases. She packed carefully for her journey to Nathaniel's cabin, bringing medical supplies along with her personal belongings. Aunt Margaret helped her prepare, offering advice and packing enough food to feed an army. You take care of each other up there, she said, hugging Catherine tightly on the morning of their departure. And you come back in the spring so I can see that you are both still in one piece. We will, Catherine promised, and thank you, Aunt Margaret, for everything, for giving me a place to start over, for welcoming Nathaniel, for understanding what we are trying to do. You are happy, and that is all that matters, Margaret said firmly. Now go. Your husband is waiting, and winter is coming fast. The journey to Nathaniel's cabin took 3 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. They climbed higher into the mountains, following trails that only Nathaniel could see. The air grew thinner and colder, and snow appeared in patches on the ground. Catherine bundled in her warmest clothes and trusted Nathaniel to lead them safely. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a ridge, and Nathaniel pointed ahead. There, he said, home. Catherine looked and saw a small cabin nestled in a protected valley. It was exactly as he had described it, solid logs with careful chinking, a stone chimney rising from one end, a covered porch across the front. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already white with snow. A creek ran through the valley, frozen at the edges, but still flowing in the center. It was isolated and beautiful, and somehow exactly right. It is perfect, she breathed. Nathaniel looked at her with such hope in his eyes. You really think so? It is not fancy, Catherine, just one room and basic everything. It is perfect, she repeated firmly, because it is ours. They rode down to the cabin, and Nathaniel helped her dismount. He had clearly been working hard during his time here. The porch was freshly swept, wood was stacked high against the wall, and when he opened the door, Catherine saw he had made improvements inside as well. A larger bed frame stood in one corner with a new mattress. Shelves lined the walls ready for her belongings. A table and 2 chairs sat near the fireplace. I built some of it new, Nathaniel explained, looking nervous. Wanted it to be ready for you, for us. Catherine walked through the space, touching things, imagining their life here. It was small but well made, practical but with small touches that showed Nathaniel's care. A window positioned to catch the morning sun. Hooks near the door for coats and gear, a carved wooden box on the shelf that she recognized as the place where Nathaniel kept his few treasures. She turned to find him watching her anxiously. I love it, she said simply. Help me unpack, and let us make this place ours. They spent the rest of the afternoon settling in. Nathaniel brought in her trunk and boxes while Catherine organized their belongings, blending her things with his until the cabin truly felt like it belonged to both of them. She placed her father's medical books on a shelf and set up a small work area where she could prepare medicines. Nathaniel hung her dresses on pegs and made space in the trunk for her warmer clothes. As darkness fell, Nathaniel built a fire in the fireplace, and the cabin filled with warmth and light. They prepared dinner together, moving around the small space with increasing comfort. Catherine discovered that Nathaniel was actually a decent cook when he put effort into it, and they made a good team. After dinner, they sat together on the new bench Nathaniel had built, positioned in front of the fireplace. He pulled Catherine close, wrapping a blanket around both of them. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the pines, but inside the cabin, all was warm and peaceful. This is the first time I've ever felt like I have a real home, Nathaniel said quietly. Not just a place I sleep, but an actual home. Because you are here. Catherine snuggled closer, resting her hand over his heart. This is my home too now. Wherever you are, that is home for me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn and listening to the wind. Catherine thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The scandal in Philadelphia that had driven her west, the wagon stuck in the mud, Nathaniel appearing out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was saying. All of it had been necessary to bring her here, to this cabin in the mountains, to this man who held her like she was something precious. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel asked after a while. "Leaving your old life? Coming out here to the middle of nowhere?" "Never," Catherine said firmly. "That old life was not really living. It was just existing according to other people's rules. This is living, Nathaniel. Making our own choices, building something real. Even if it is hard sometimes, it is worth it because it is ours." "Ours," Nathaniel repeated, as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that." Winter settled in fully over the next few weeks, and Catherine learned what it meant to live in the high mountains during the cold months. Snow fell heavily and often, piling up around the cabin and transforming the landscape into something alien and beautiful. Nathaniel taught her how to read the weather, how to move safely through deep snow, how to conserve heat and resources during the long, dark nights. It was not easy. Catherine had to learn new skills and adapt to a level of isolation she had never experienced before. Some days she missed the bustle of town, missed having patients to treat and other people to talk to. But Nathaniel was always there, patient and supportive, helping her adjust without making her feel foolish for struggling. And there were compensations. The incredible silence of a snow-covered forest, the beauty of watching the sun rise over ice-covered peaks, the satisfaction of learning to do things she had never imagined, like snowshoeing through powder or helping Nathaniel check his trap lines. Most of all, there was the deepening of their relationship. Living together in such close quarters, depending on each other completely, they learned each other in ways that would have taken years in a normal courtship. Catherine discovered that Nathaniel had a dry sense of humor and a surprising knowledge of literature from reading during long winters alone. Nathaniel learned that Catherine sang while she worked and talked to herself when she was thinking through a medical problem. They argued occasionally, usually about small things made large by cabin fever. But they learned to work through disagreements, to communicate clearly and honestly. They learned that their partnership was strong enough to handle conflict. As winter deepened, Catherine also discovered she was pregnant. She recognized the signs from her medical training long before she missed her monthly courses. The knowledge filled her with a mixture of excitement and fear. She was going to have a baby, here in this remote cabin, far from any doctor. She told Nathaniel one evening as they sat by the fire. He had been carving something, his hands moving with steady precision, and he went absolutely still when she spoke. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "As certain as I can be without a proper examination," Catherine said. "All the signs are there. I would estimate I am about 6 weeks along, which means the baby will come in early summer." Nathaniel set down his carving and turned to face her fully. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," Catherine admitted, "but happy. I want this baby, Nathaniel. I want to build a family with you. But I am also aware of the challenges. I will need to be somewhere with better resources when it is time to give birth." "We will go back to South Pass City in the spring," Nathaniel said immediately. "Get you settled with your aunt and Dr. Morrison well before your time. I will stay with you, make sure you have everything you need." "And after?" Catherine asked. "What happens after the baby comes?" "We figure it out," Nathaniel said. "Same as we have figured out everything else. Maybe we spend more time in town for a few years while the baby is small. Maybe we build a better place, somewhere between here and there. Or maybe we just take it season by season and see what works. The details do not matter as much as the fact that we will be together." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You're not upset?" "Upset?" Nathaniel looked genuinely confused. "Why would I be upset? You're giving me a family, Catherine, something I never thought I would have. I am grateful and excited, and yes, a little scared too. But mostly I am just happy." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "You and me. A little person made from both of us." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Catherine asked, relaxing against him. "Healthy," Nathaniel said firmly. "That is all I hope for. Healthy baby and safe delivery for you. Everything else is just details." They spent the rest of the winter planning and preparing. Nathaniel made a cradle from wood he had been saving, carving it with care and lining it with soft furs. Catherine sewed baby clothes from fabric she had brought with her and prepared herbal remedies that would be helpful after the birth. They talked about names and wondered what the baby would look like and made plans for the future. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and opening the trails, they packed up and headed back to South Pass City. The journey took longer this time, with Catherine's pregnancy making her more tired and Nathaniel being extra cautious about every step. But they made it safely, arriving in town in late April to Aunt Margaret's delighted shock. "A baby!" she exclaimed, pulling Catherine into a careful hug. "Oh, my dear girl, this is wonderful news. You will stay here, of course. Your old room is ready, and we will make sure you have everything you need." Dr. Morrison was equally pleased and immediately took charge of Catherine's medical care. "I will be monitoring you closely," he said firmly, "and I will be present for the delivery. Between the two of us, we will make sure everything goes smoothly." The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Catherine's belly grew round, and she felt the baby moving inside her, small flutters at first and then stronger kicks. Nathaniel was constantly attentive, bringing her whatever she needed and worrying over every small discomfort. She found his concern endearing even when it became a bit overbearing. "I am not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he had insisted she sit down after she had been on her feet for all of 10 minutes. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong and healthy, and Dr. Morrison says everything looks perfect." "I know," Nathaniel said, "but you are everything to me, Catherine. I could not bear it if something happened to you." "Nothing's going to happen to me," she promised, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Feel that? That is our baby telling you to stop worrying and trust that I know my own body." The baby kicked against his palm, and Nathaniel's face transformed with wonder. No matter how many times he felt it, he never seemed to get used to the miracle of it. Labor began on a warm June morning. Catherine woke to the first contractions and recognized immediately what was happening. She woke Nathaniel calmly and told him to fetch Dr. Morrison. Then she began preparing herself mentally for what was ahead. Nathaniel looked terrified, but he did as she asked, returning quickly with the doctor. Aunt Margaret appeared as well, taking charge of the practical matters and shooing Nathaniel out of the room. "This is women's work," she said firmly. "You go downstairs and wait like men have done since the beginning of time." "I want to stay," Nathaniel protested, looking to Catherine for support. "Let him stay," Catherine said. She was already breathing through another contraction, but she managed to focus on him. "I want him here. He is strong, and I need that strength right now." Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "It is unusual, but if Catherine wants you here, then you stay. Just do not get in the way." Labor was long and difficult. Catherine had assisted with births before and knew what to expect, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. The pain was intense, coming in waves that built and built until she thought she could not bear it. But Nathaniel stayed beside her the whole time, holding her hand when she needed something to grip, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, speaking quiet words of encouragement when the pain threatened to overwhelm her. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. You can do this, Catherine. I am right here with you." Finally, after nearly 18 hours of labor, Catherine felt the overwhelming urge to push. Dr. Morrison guided her through it, calm and professional, while Aunt Margaret stood ready with clean cloths and warm water. Nathaniel supported Catherine from behind, lending her his strength when her own was nearly exhausted. And then, with a final effort that tore a scream from her throat, the baby was born. A lusty cry filled the room, and Catherine collapsed back against Nathaniel, panting and sweating and laughing with relief. "A boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squirming infant. "A healthy baby boy with good lungs and all his fingers and toes." "A son," Nathaniel breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son." Aunt Margaret cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Catherine's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and absolutely perfect, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Nathaniel leaned over her shoulder, staring at their son with absolute wonder. "He is so small," he said. "How can something so small be so perfect?" "He will grow," Catherine said, smiling through happy tears. "With you as his father, he will probably be enormous." They named him James, after Catherine's father. James Grant, born in the summer of 1876 in South Pass City, Wyoming Territory, to parents who had found each other against all odds and built a love strong enough to weather anything. The next few weeks were exhausting and wonderful. Catherine recovered from the birth while learning to care for a newborn. Nathaniel was surprisingly good with the baby, his large hands gentle as he changed diapers and soothed James when he cried. Aunt Margaret helped with everything, giving them advice when they needed it and space when they did not. When James was 6 weeks old and Catherine had regained her strength, they began discussing their plans for the future. Nathaniel's trap lines needed attention, but the cabin was no place for a newborn. After much discussion, they decided on a compromise. They would spend the rest of the summer and fall in town, allowing Catherine to continue her medical work and giving James time to grow stronger. When winter came, Nathaniel would spend weeks at a time in the mountains tending his traps, but he would return regularly to town to be with his family. In the spring, when James was nearly a year old, they would reassess and decide if he was ready for the journey to the cabin. It was not perfect, but it worked. They were learning that building a life together meant constant adjustment and compromise. Neither of them had to give up what mattered most, but they both had to be flexible about how and when they pursued their goals. As summer turned to fall, Catherine settled into a routine that felt sustainable. She worked with Dr. Morrison several days a week, treating patients and building her skills. The rest of the time, she cared for James and maintained their space in the boarding house. Nathaniel helped Aunt Margaret with repairs and heavy work, earning their keep and making himself useful. And when winter finally arrived, he began his circuit between the cabin and town, spending 2 weeks in the mountains and then a week with his family. It was hard being apart, but the reunions were sweet. Every time Nathaniel returned, James had grown and changed, reaching new milestones. He smiled for the first time when he was 3 months old, and Nathaniel happened to be there to see it. He laughed for the first time during one of Nathaniel's visits in the winter, delighted by his father's beard. And he took his first steps in the spring, wobbling across the room into his father's waiting arms. By the time James was 18 months old, he was sturdy and strong, and Catherine felt ready to attempt the journey to the cabin. They packed carefully, bringing everything a toddler might need along with their own supplies. The journey took longer with James along, requiring frequent stops for nursing and rest, but they made it safely, arriving at the cabin in early summer. The high mountain valley was beautiful in the warm weather. Wildflowers covered the meadows, and the creek ran clear and cold. Catherine and Nathaniel settled into a peaceful routine, splitting their time between work and family. Nathaniel checked his trap lines and hunted for meat, while Catherine foraged for medicinal herbs and tended a small garden. James played happily in the meadow under their watchful eyes, chasing butterflies and discovering the wonders of the natural world. 2 years later, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. This time the birth was easier, accomplished at the cabin with only Nathaniel to help. He had learned enough about the process that he could assist competently, and Catherine trusted him completely. Sarah arrived on a cool autumn morning, smaller than James had been, but just as healthy. James, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, bringing Catherine clean cloths and patting Sarah's head gently when she cried. Nathaniel watched his growing family with obvious contentment, sometimes shaking his head as if he could not quite believe this was his life. "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James play in the last light of day while Sarah slept in her cradle inside. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Nathaniel said simply. 10 years ago, I was alone in these mountains, convinced that was how I would die someday, alone and content with it. And now look at this, a wife I love more every day, 2 beautiful children, a life that is full and rich and better than anything I ever imagined." "We are all lucky," Catherine said, taking his hand. "I could have married that awful man in Philadelphia and lived a respectable, miserable life. Instead, I took a chance on coming west, and I found you. Found this. Found everything I did not even know I was looking for. Do you ever miss it? Nathaniel asked. The medical work, the town, being around more people? Catherine considered the question honestly. Sometimes, she admitted. I miss the intellectual challenge of difficult cases and the satisfaction of helping people heal. But I'm still doing that work, just differently. I treat injuries here at the cabin, and we go into town regularly so I can work with Dr. Morrison. It is not the life I imagined, but it is better because I am building it with you. What if we found a way to do both more fully? Nathaniel suggested. I have been thinking about this. What if we built a real house, something bigger, closer to town but still with land and space, somewhere you could see patients and I could still access my territory, somewhere between my old life and your work, a place where we could have everything. Catherine turned to look at him, surprised and touched. You would do that? Give up your cabin in the high country? Not give up, Nathaniel corrected. We could keep the cabin for summers and hunting season. But I have been thinking that our children deserve to grow up with other children around, and you deserve to pursue your calling. My needs are simple. As long as I have you in the mountains or close enough to reach, I am happy. Where would we build? Catherine asked. Excitement building. I've been looking at land about 10 miles outside South Pass City, Nathaniel said. There's a place with good water and timber, close enough to town for you to work, but far enough out that we would still have privacy. We could build something bigger, room for the family to grow, maybe even set up a proper space where you could see patients who cannot make it to town. Nathaniel Grant, Catherine said, shaking her head in wonder. You never stop surprising me. Here, I thought we had found our balance, and you are already thinking 3 steps ahead. I just want you happy, he said simply. You have given up a lot to be with me. I want to give some of that back in a way that works for both of us. They spent the rest of the summer planning and preparing. Nathaniel scouted the land he had mentioned and brought Catherine to see it. She fell in love with it immediately. The property had a small meadow perfect for gardens and grazing, with forest on 3 sides and a clear creek running through. The view stretched for miles, taking in the valley below and the mountains beyond. It felt private but not isolated, remote but accessible. They purchased the land with money from Nathaniel's furs and the savings Catherine had managed to accumulate from her medical work. That fall, they began construction with help from men Nathaniel hired in town. The house they built was larger than the cabin, with 2 bedrooms upstairs and a large main room below. Nathaniel built a separate room off to the side that could serve as Catherine's medical office, with shelves for supplies and a proper examination area. By the following spring, the house was complete. They moved in with their growing family, and Catherine began seeing patients again more regularly. Word spread that there was a skilled medical practitioner living just outside town, and people began seeking her out. Some came to the house, while others waited and found her on the days she worked in town with Dr. Morrison. Catherine found a balance that satisfied her need to practice medicine while still allowing her to be present for her children. Nathaniel thrived as well. He continued his trapping and hunting, but he also took on guiding work, leading men into the mountains for hunting expeditions, or showing settlers safe routes through difficult terrain. His reputation for strength and reliability spread, and he was never short of work when he wanted it. Their family continued to grow. 2 years after Sarah, Catherine gave birth to another son they named Daniel. 3 years after that, a second daughter arrived, whom they called Emma. The house filled with noise and laughter and the constant chaos of raising 4 children in the Wyoming wilderness. Through it all, Catherine and Nathaniel's love deepened and matured. They weathered difficult times, including a winter when Daniel fell seriously ill and Catherine used every skill she possessed to save him. They celebrated triumphs, like when James shot his first deer at age 12, or when Sarah read her first book all the way through. They supported each other's dreams and built a life that honored both of their needs. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathaniel planned a surprise for Catherine. He arranged for Aunt Margaret to watch the children for a few days. Then he packed supplies and led Catherine up into the mountains. She did not know where they were going until she recognized the trail leading to his original cabin. I have not been here in years, she said as they approached the small structure, not since before James was born. I know, Nathaniel said. I thought maybe we should come back, remember where we started. They spent 3 days at the cabin, just the two of them, reliving the early days of their marriage. They hiked through the valleys, sat by the creek, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. On the last evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the mountains turn purple and gold. "Do you remember when you pulled that wagon from the mud?" Catherine asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I thought you were going to hurt yourself. I could not believe anyone was that strong." "I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met," Nathaniel said with a smile. "Refusing to give up, just methodically working the problem even though you were in over your head. I knew right then I wanted to know you better." "And then you pulled me close by the fire that night," Catherine continued. "Made me feel safe for the first time since my father died. I think I started falling in love with you in that moment." "Only started," Nathaniel teased. "I was already gone by then." "Well, you had the advantage of seeing me at my worst," Catherine pointed out, "muddy and exhausted and probably looking like a disaster. If you could fall in love with that version of me, the cleaned-up version must have been easy." "Every version of you is easy to love," Nathaniel said seriously. "The muddy version, the version covered in blood from treating patients, the version with baby spit up on your shoulder, the version trying to wrangle 4 children at once, all of them. Forever." Catherine turned to kiss him, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for helping me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for saying yes," Nathaniel replied, "for taking a chance on a mountain man who did not know how to talk about feelings, for teaching me what family could be." They sat there as the stars emerged, holding hands and remembering their journey. From a wagon stuck in the mud to a life rich with love and purpose, they had built something extraordinary together. Years continued to pass. Their children grew up strong and capable, each finding their own path in the world. James became a surveyor, mapping the expanding territory and spending his life outdoors like his father. Sarah trained with her mother and became a nurse, eventually moving to Cheyenne to work in a hospital there. Daniel took over his father's guiding business, leading expeditions into the mountains with the same quiet competence Nathaniel had shown. Emma surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in South Pass City that served the growing community. Catherine continued her medical practice well into her 60s, finally retiring when arthritis made the fine work of surgery too difficult. But she never stopped teaching, training younger practitioners, and sharing the knowledge her father had given her. Dr. Morrison had passed away years earlier, leaving her his medical library and instruments, with a note thanking her for being the daughter he never had. Nathaniel stayed strong and active far longer than most men, still hiking into the high country well into his 70s. His hair went gray and then white, and his beard grew long, making him look like some kind of mountain sage. Children in town told stories about him, embellishing his strength and exploits until he became something of a legend. He bore it with patient amusement, correcting the worst exaggerations, but letting the stories live. On a cool autumn day in 1915, 40 years after they had first met, Catherine and Nathaniel sat on the porch of their home and watched the sunset together. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp-minded and deeply connected. Their children visited regularly, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with noise and energy. But for now, it was just the two of them, as it had been at the beginning. "Do you have any regrets?" Catherine asked, taking his hand. His fingers were gnarled with age and old injuries, but his grip was still strong. "Not a single one," Nathaniel said firmly. "Every choice I made led me to you, and you were worth all of it. The war, the loneliness, the years of wandering, all worth it because they brought me here." "I feel the same way," Catherine said. "Even the scandal in Philadelphia that drove me west. I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me, but it was actually the best. It set me free to find you, to build this life." "We have had a good run," Nathaniel observed, looking out at the land they had built their life on. "Better than good. Extraordinary." "We have," Catherine agreed, "and we are not done yet. I plan on having at least 20 more years with you, Nathaniel Grant." "Then I guess I better stick around," he said with that rare smile that still made her heart flutter even after 40 years. "Could not disappoint my wife." They sat together as darkness fell, Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that lasted. A love forged in the wild Wyoming frontier, strong enough to pull wagons from the mud and gentle enough to comfort by firelight. A partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. The house behind them was quiet now, but it held the echoes of a life well lived. Children raised and launched into the world, patients healed and lives saved, laughter and tears, triumphs and setbacks, all woven together into a story of love and resilience. As the first stars appeared overhead, Catherine rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close just as he had done by that first campfire so many years ago. They sat in comfortable silence, needing no words to communicate what they felt. Their love was written in the home they had built, in the family they had raised, in the life they had created together against the backdrop of the Wild West. Two souls who had found each other when they needed it most, and who had spent a lifetime proving that love, when built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, could overcome any obstacle and last forever. Their story had begun with a wagon stuck in mud, and a mountain man strong enough to lift it free. It had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined, a love story for the ages played out against the magnificent wilderness of Wyoming territory. And on that porch, as autumn gave way to winter and the cycle of seasons continued its eternal dance, Nathaniel and Catherine Grant held each other close and knew they had gotten it exactly right. Their happily ever after was not a fairy tale ending, but a daily choice to love, to work together, to build something meaningful. And in the end, that was better than any fairy tale could ever be. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the patients Catherine had healed, in the men Nathaniel had guided safely through dangerous territory. But most of all, it lived on in the example they had set of what true partnership looked like. Two strong individuals who had chosen each other and had spent a lifetime making that choice worth everything. As they finally rose to go inside, the mountains stood watch over them as they had for 40 years, silent witnesses to a love story that had become legend in its own quiet way. The story of a mountain man who could lift the impossible and a doctor's daughter who had the courage to build a new life in an untamed land. Together, they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through the generations long after they were gone. And that was the greatest happy ending of all.